So when we're talking about oppression, we're thinking about that in this country it has occurred historically and over time, and that it still continues in the present and in our current reality. One way to describe it is that oppression is the targeting of some groups or some peoples as less than, and other groups or peoples as better than. Another way of talking about oppression is the idea of saying that it is this systematic mistreatment of the powerless by the powerful, resulting again in the targeting of certain groups for less of society's benefits. And it involves sometimes an overt and sometimes a subtle devaluing or non-acceptance of the powerless group, and may play out on the economic, the political, and or the social and psychological levels. So with this notion of oppression, we can then talk about the ways that oppression, or the isms, play out at 4 different levels. First of all, when we talk about the personal level, we're referring to those attitudes, values, feelings, beliefs, etc., that we have usually learned or caught as we've been growing up, about the inferiority or differentness of people in certain groups, people in certain target groups, right? At the interpersonal level, this is where we act on those assumptions that we hold. So it's what is my behavior in light of those assumptions or biases that I hold. The institutional level is very, very important when we're doing anti-racism work, and it's looking at how the rules, customs, traditions, practices, etc., in our society at large or in your organization or in particular are working to the advantage of certain groups and to the disadvantage of other groups. Okay? So what are those norms? What are those rules? What are the sort of, the informal ones? Sometimes the ones that aren't written, they have a lot of power. So taking the time to look at or analyze those rules, customs, traditions, and practices, how do they play out? And then the cultural level is one that can have a lot of nuances to it. And it usually involves things like beliefs that a particular group has, their ways of thinking, their behavioral practices, their aesthetic standards, what they think is right and beautiful. So it can be linguistic practice, linguistic norms, language, all of that. So all of that is part of our culture, our traditions and whatever. It's when, in fact, one group's culture or heritage becomes dominant, and that way of being is seen as better than the others. And so that way of doing things is the way that things happen, okay? So that is what cultural levelisms are and that we need to look for.
In this session, we're going to talk about privilege and cultural and institutional isms as they impact various areas of congregational life. In addition to what you've just heard from Joan and Jim, we'll be using the article that you've downloaded called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack by Peggy McIntosh. Please take 20 minutes to read the article and then resume with part 2 of this session.